My whole life, I have always struggled to figure out what it was with the order of the books in the Bible according to our table of contents. If you open up a table of contents, then you will see that the books of the Bible in the Christian Old Testament are organized according to genre. That is, according to how the type of literature works, what the literature is. So, for example, the first couple of books goes from Genesis all the way up until Job, and those are all narrative books. The first 5 are called the Pentateuch, and then the ones following after that are called the historical books. Then you have Psalms through to Song of Songs, and these are the wisdom texts. And then after that, you have the prophets. Now, if you're wondering, how do I figure out what is the order of these books of the Bible, or how do I figure out within the historical books which ones go first? So the historical books are actually the easiest because they are following one storyline until a certain point when you get to Chronicles, and then it retells the same storyline. And then it moves to a specific part within that storyline with Ezra and Nehemiah. And then, there's no real way to tell within those books what the order and what the structure is. And I'm a Bible study student, and to be honest, I still don't know the order according to the Christian ordering that we have in our Old Testament. But what I am familiar with, very familiar with, and what I've been doing a lot of meditating on recently is the order and structure within Jesus's Old Testament. Now, it wasn't really an Old Testament because the Bible in Jesus's day wasn't a Bible. One thing you'll notice is that this Bible is bound. However, in the ancient days of Jesus' time, people would have encountered any type of text in a scroll. In fact, a book, if we're even allowed to use that term, because he wasn't reading codices, a book would have only been about the length of 30 pages in content of one of our books today. And even that, I believe the Isaiah scroll was 23 feet. And so even if you're reading ancient texts from the days of Jesus and even time after, I was reading Augustine's Confessions, and you'll see book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5. And so today, that is all contained in one book that we call Augustine's Confessions, and that's all bound. But the reason that it's within smaller books is because they couldn't fit more than about 30 of our today's pages of content into that amount of space. Anyway, and that's also why there's 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, instead of it just being Kings and Chronicles, and the same for Samuel, of course. However, in Jesus's day, this was different. There was, in fact, a different ordering of his Old Testament. And I'm going to stop using the word Old Testament here because the Old Testament refers to what we find in the Christian table of contents for the texts leading up to the time of the Incarnation. But Jesus encountered the Hebrew Scriptures, the same Hebrew Scriptures that we find in a Protestant canon, and he read other texts, but he didn't read them at the same level or in the same way. The texts that Jesus encountered as the Hebrew Scriptures were ordered in what we now know as the TaNaKh. And you can actually know this because in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, also in other places, but also in Luke 24:44, he talks about the law of Moses, that is the Torah. Torah, once it gets translated into Greek as nomos, That was a very common way that Jews in Jesus' day translated the Hebrew word Torah. Was namas, which means law, but actually a better translation from the Hebrew straight into English would be instruction. So there's the Torah, the instruction. Uh, he says the Torah of Moses, the Nevi'im. Nevi'im is Hebrew, it means prophets. You hear that Jesus says the law and the prophets all the time. And what he's doing is he's using the title for the two first main divisions within the TaNaKh as a way to refer to the whole of the TaNaKh. In the same way that you might say to your friend who got a new car, hey man, you got some nice tires. Now you're not just talking about his tires, you're talking about his car in its entirety. But either way, in Luke 24:44, he also says, and in the Ketuvim, well, what he says is the Psalms. Again, he's using what's called a synecdoche. He's referring to a smaller portion within a much larger portion. And so the Psalms is the first of many books, 11 books, all arranged together in what's called the Ketuvim, or the writings. And now, I've heard, actually just recently, I heard on a podcast a professor who was saying that, there's the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. And the Ketuvim, the writings, that's general stuff. He actually just called it the junk drawer. And it had me thinking for some time, because that was how I had always thought about it. It's like, how do you come up with such a generic name as writings? Of course they're writings. Everything is writings. But I thought that there had to be some meaningful order to the Ketuvim. And after long thinking, and my mind being provoked by certain sources and just meditation in and of itself, I found that a section within the writings called the Megillot had its own internal structure and was intentionally organized. And then I realized that this Megillot in the center, all the texts within the Ketuvim were reflected upon that Megillot. And then I also encountered a lecture that I had previously listened to from the Bible Project's class on the introduction to the Hebrew Bible. And the instructor, Dr. TaNaKh, referred to the fact that the latter prophets are actually based on the Genesis patriarchs. And I'll get into that later. And then I thought, whoa. So then I also thought about the former prophets. Those are also internally connected. And all of the Torah, as you can see, has its own internal connections and its own structure and design. But then, within the whole of the TaNaKh, the Torah and the Ketuvim are connected, and it's reflected in on the Nevi'im. And so that's what I want to share today, is the design of the TaNaKh. And this is going to have implications for the composition, for the canon, and what I'm going to call consummation of what we today encounter as the Old Testament. And so that's what this kind of lecture is going to be on today, is on the internal design of the TaNaKh. Okay, so the first 5 books are all in the same order as how you're going to find them within your Christian ordering of the Old Testament. However, when you get to the prophets, you'll realize that there are 2 subsections within the section of the prophets. So first of all, you have the former prophets. And those are going to be Joshua, Judges, not Ruth, but Samuel, and then Kings. Now, one way of memorizing the differences and how the books are differently arranged is you might have thought that Joshua judged Ruth, but you're going to find out that Joshua actually judged Samuel. That's one of the ways that I think about it. That's kind of funny. But the only difference here is that you remove Ruth and you move her over here to the Megillot, and we'll get to that. But then you also have the latter prophets. Now realize we've stripped a lot of the books that were going in between these, right? Because these latter prophets would go to the end, but now we've stripped them and we've moved them over to here to the Ketuvim, and we'll get over to that in a second. But in the latter prophets, you have three major prophets, quote unquote, and major just refers to the amount of content in them, not the significance of the content. But you have Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And Daniel still is a prophet. Recognize how Joshua, Judges, and Samuel, and Kings, those are all considered prophets. It's because anybody within the Hebrew Scriptures who is speaking on God's behalf, these people who are chosen to speak for God are the prophets. And in fact, actually, Abraham is a prophet. And I don't know if you knew this, but the scriptures actually refer to him in such a manner. In Genesis, I believe it's chapter 20, Abraham is with Abimelech. And, he lies about Sarai, or at this moment, she's Sarah. I apologize for that. And he lies about her, says that she's his sister, and so that he doesn't get killed when they try to take Sarah for themselves. And Abimelech takes Sarah, he's about to sleep with her, and God comes to him in this terrifying night vision and says, "Hey bud, watch it, I'm going to screw you if you touch this man's woman. This man is a seer." He is a seer. Now, later in the book of Samuel, we see that the term seer was an older term to refer to a prophet. So Abraham is also a prophet. So Joshua is a prophet. The judges, quite a few of the judges are prophets. Samuel's a prophet. There is a much broader understanding of the term prophet. And so anyways, you have the three major prophets, and then you have what's called the 12. And the 12 are actually all on one scroll. And these 12 are the 12 minor prophets. There's no difference here from what we would call the minor prophets today. Now, Daniel is moved over here, but that's something else. The Ketuvim begins with Psalms, Proverbs, Job. Then it has Ruth, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah. This is all one book. Scholars today know that this is one book. The themes and the movements within this book, the structure of this book, assumes that it's one book, one text. In fact, when scholars say that we have found every single text among the Dead Sea Scrolls from the Hebrew Scriptures except for Esther, that is on the assumption that Ezra and Nehemiah are one book. I can't remember which we haven't found, but we found one from either Ezra or Nehemiah, but we haven't found the other. So that's on the assumption that this is one book. And then there is Chronicles. And, Chronicles doesn't even really make sense within our ordering of the scriptures. It's just based on genre. Chronicles would go after Kings in our ordering. And all it does there is make it so that whenever you get to Kings and read Chronicles again, now it helps in that you can compare it to the other literature beforehand, which is helpful. But other than that, you're just going to find that you're rereading all the same stuff that you just read up into that moment. Because Chronicles is actually extremely important. It's a summary and a retelling of the whole story of the Bible, all the way from Adam into the people of Israel being called back out of exile. Okay, so that is the ordering of the Hebrew TaNaKh. And now what I want to do is I want to go and look at these texts and the internal structure. So first, let's look at the Torah. So this is so fascinating. It's super interesting. So in the Torah, it opens up with Adam in Eden, and God gives him his blessing. Adam screws it. Adam and his wife Eve, they're sent out of Eden. God blesses Noah. Noah's family just kind of falls apart over his son, who was probably trying to sleep with his wife to get the upper hand. And so then he curses that son's son, his grandson, Canon. And then it moves on to the Tower of Babel. And humanity is finally obeying one of God's commands to be fruitful and multiply, but they are not filling the land. They are, in fact, all saturating one part. And there was probably an imperial imposition of a language upon the people. Because before the Tower of Babel, there's this person named Peleg, and it says that in that day the earth was divided, so there already probably were different languages. But what's happening in Babylon then is probably people are imposing and saying that you have to speak this one language, and that's how they're all speaking one language. But it doesn't matter, because God is going to screw over that work by confusing all of their languages and sending them all over the earth. And then what we see is God chooses one person, and God is going to bless the whole of the world through that one person. And that one person's name is Abram. It's not Abraham at the time. So God blesses Abram and his family. He makes a lot of really screwed up choices, but he is faithful to God all in all. And so God decides to bless him through his family onto Isaac and to Jacob and to Jacob's 12 sons. And now Jacob, by the way, is also named Israel. So that's the nation of Israel. God is going to choose to bless the nation of Israel, and through blessing the people of Israel, he's going to bless all the people of the world. Okay, so this is where this gets super fascinating. So Genesis ends off with Jacob's 12 sons, and they're all in the land of Egypt. God had called them out of Canaan into Egypt during a famine so that Joseph could provide for them. And so they're all in Egypt. And it ends with Israel singing a song prophesying and talking about his 12 sons. It's a song about his 12 sons. And then he dies, and it's waiting for his bones to be taken out of Egypt and to be taken into the promised land, because God had promised a land, the land of Canaan, to Abraham, and then that promise goes down through his seed. And then the same for Joseph. He dies. And so you're waiting for them to leave the land of Egypt and go into the promised land. And that's actually supposed to happen with the next generation. Not the next generation after them, but the next generation that we are told about in the Torah. And that is Moses' generation. So Moses is chosen by God as a prophet. He speaks to him. He calls him to call his people out of the land of Egypt and to go to the promised land. However, as the Torah ends, now get a load of this, in the book of Deuteronomy, God has already said that the generation was too faithless. They were too faithless to the covenant, and so God is not going to let that generation enter the land. It won't be until the second generation. So Deuteronomy is a whole block of text where Moses is just giving this long speech just right outside the land. So again, they're waiting to enter the land. So Genesis ends with an anticipation of entering into the land. It talks about waiting for the bones of Jacob to be brought into out of Egypt into Canaan. And then Deuteronomy ends with Moses dying. And it also ends, actually, before Moses dies, he gives his own song for Israel. He gives 2 songs for Israel. And he prophesies, and he says what's going to happen for the Israelites in the end of days. Sound like anything? Moses is actually not repeating in the same in content terms, but he's doing the same thing as what Jacob or Israel did at the end of Genesis. So you see that Deuteronomy and Genesis are connected. They both end with a song for the 12 sons of Israel, and then after that, an anticipation of entering into the land of Canaan. Super awesome. Now, in between these, you have Exodus and you have Numbers. And Exodus has the beginning of the people being called out of the land of Egypt to Sinai. And Numbers ends up with the people at Sinai and going from Sinai to the place where they're going to end up in Deuteronomy. And Numbers is very much telling the story of the disobedience of Israel. That's actually the text in which they're so disobedient they want to kill Moses and head back to Egypt. And so God says that he will not take that generation into the land. And Exodus is also filled with stories of Israel's disobedience. That's when Israel builds the golden calf. That's when they whine and they complain. And so these are very much connected to each other's as well. And within the center of that is the book of Leviticus. One other thing. Exodus is talking about, it spends like 10 or 20 chapters solely on the construction of the tabernacle, saying this is how you shall create the tabernacle and this is how it shall look and everything. And then Numbers actually begins by talking about the formation of the camp that's set around the tabernacle. It's a crosshair around the tabernacle. So those are very much linked onto each other. And in the very center of it is everyone's favorite book, Leviticus. And Leviticus is a book on ritual purity and justice. And so it begins talking about sacrifices and how to offer up sacrifices to God, and it ends by talking about the different feast days. And right in the center of the book of Leviticus is the Day of Atonement. And, the Day of Atonement, this is Leviticus chapter 16, is all about two goats. So there's the goat that's for Yahweh, that's going to be killed for Yahweh. It's a blameless, clean goat. And the death of this goat is going to represent all of Israel's sins. And it is and also their ritual impurity. It's taken upon this this lamb. I believe I really can't remember, to be honest. But it dies in the place of Israel, and then there's another. There's a goat. This is sometimes called the scapegoat that they're supposed to send off. And this is supposed to carry the sins of Israel off into the wilderness to a spiritual being called Azazel. And that's sometimes translated as scapegoat. And I would just highly recommend that you look at a bunch of translations because more scholars are saying it's probably Azazel. There's Second Temple Jewish texts that talk about this. Anyways, that is a whole thing in and of itself. But the Day of Atonement is at the very center of the Torah. It's a very important holiday. And you can see why that's very important for Jesus. Jesus, on the day that he's betrayed and crucified, there's Jesus of Nazareth, the son of the Father, and there is Jesus Bar Abbas. Bar means son, and Abba means father, son of the Father. And the people are given the option of releasing one and killing the other. Does that remind you of the Day of Atonement with the two lambs, where one is released into the wilderness and the other is killed? Well, what do you know? They kill the blameless, pure, unblemished one, Jesus, and Barabbas is set free when he's supposed to die. Also, let me show you this, because this is super awesome and it's going to blow your mind. And it blew my mind as I was reading it at the beginning of last year in the book of Jubilees, because Second Temple Jews were absolutely tracking on to the theme of the Day of Atonement throughout the Torah. Now, the book of Jubilees is a retelling of the book of Genesis. And it's called the book of Jubilees because everything is presented as happening within a cycle of different amounts of Jubilees. A Jubilee happens every 50 years because the 50 years is after 7 times 7 years. 7 times 7 equals 49. If you don't know anything about the Bible loves the number 7. It's a holy number because God created the earth in 6 days and then rested on the 7th. And so in the book of Jubilees, it's creatively retelling the Bible, kind of like how TV shows and movies do today, like Prince of Egypt or The Chosen, or some like much worse, disgusting films like Noah, and I think is it called Gods and Kings or Gods and Generals? I can't remember. But anyways, it retells the Torah, and within it talks about it really focuses on Genesis and the patriarch narratives. That's Abraham on through the sons of Israel. And it focuses on presenting it as if God is telling these patriarchs what feasts of Israel's that they need to celebrate, whether that's the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of whatever it is. And the Day of Atonement, they say, that they celebrate the Day of Atonement, Jacob does, when his son Joseph dies. Now, the interesting thing about Joseph's death, he doesn't actually die. His father thinks that he dies because his brother threw him in a pit. They take his coat and they take goat's blood, and they paint it on his coat to show that he's died. In other words, Joseph, according to meaning, when we're looking at meaning, he is presented as a dead lamb. They use lamb's blood to cover his coat and show his father that he's dead. So symbolically or spiritually speaking, he is the dead lamb from the Day of Atonement. And that is certainly why the author of Jubilees said that that's when they started celebrating the Day of Atonement. But Joseph is also the lamb that's sent off into the wilderness, because Joseph, bodily speaking, is sent off into Egypt, into the wilderness. And but then there's also the theme of resurrection, because Jacob thinks that Joseph is dead throughout, and then it's only towards the end that he finds his own son who is alive. Okay, it gets even deeper though, because if you go back to the story of what in Jewish tradition is called the Akedah, that is the story of when Abraham is told by God to sacrifice Isaac, and he's about to do it, but an angel of Yahweh stops him. He is about to sacrifice and kill his own son. And even in the book of Hebrews, it says that he did die and was resurrected, spiritually speaking. So in a sense, he was sacrificed and he did die. But then another lamb dies in his place and he gets to go free. You tracking? This is the Day of Atonement. And this is at the very center, the very heart of the whole Torah. It is absolutely awesome. Okay, are you ready? Now we're going to move on to the Nevi'im, the prophets. Now, the prophets, in the former prophets, you begin with Joshua. And in the book of Joshua, they're going in and they take over the land. And they enter into the land of Israel. They finally do it. And then the book of Kings, in the book of Kings, Israel ends up being exiled. The northern kingdom of Israel, and then finally the kingdom of Judah. So the former prophets begin with Israel entering into the land, and it ends with Israel being exiled from the land. And in between that are two stories that are very much connected to each other. You have the book of Judges, which is the darkest, the deepest, darkest, worst part of Israel's history, in which Israel it has no king. It continually repeats the phrase, "In those days there was no king for Israel." Well, author of Judges, I wonder what you are looking forward to. Well, they are, of course, looking forward to the narrative known as Samuel. And in Samuel, guess what? Israel is given a king. So, anyways, that right there is also a chiasm. A chiasm is a structure in which, think of like a poem, if you know about poetry, and I'm bringing you back to English class, but in poems, there can be a different rhyme scheme. When we're talking about structure, we're talking about the scheme of meaning, the structure. And so, you know how in poems it can go A, B, A, B, A, B, okay? But it can also go A, B, C, B, A. And when we're talking about structure, that structure where something is reflected in upon itself, dun, 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 that is a chiasm. So that is chiastic. The former prophets are chiastic, and the Torah is chiastic. But there's also the latter prophets. And in the latter prophets, there are 3 major prophets. And then there's what's called the 12. They're all on one scroll. But these are the minor prophets, Hosea through Malachi. And these can be compared to the Genesis patriarchs. 3 major prophets, 3 of the first patriarchs in Genesis, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, or Israel. And then you have Jacob or Israel, he has 12 sons. Get a load of this. There are 12 minor prophets, all kept on one scroll, called the 12. So the 12 minor prophets are the 12 sons of Israel, and Jacob or Israel. And I think I still have more thinking to do about this, but I can see at least some light connections between these characters, these Genesis patriarchs, and the latter prophets. So first of all, Jacob or Israel is connected into Ezekiel in that Jacob very much continually has visions, very surreal visions of God. He wrestles or struggles with God. He sees angels coming in and going out as he's going out from Laban, I believe it is. He also sees angels descending and ascending on a ramp up to heaven. He has all of these visions. And guess what? Ezekiel is a visionary himself, and he sees the Shekinah. I'm probably jacking up that pronunciation, but that is, he has a vision of the very throne, kind of chariot of God. And his whole, the whole thing of Ezekiel is filled with visions of that. And him having these crazy visions, but seeing visions of God and of these angels, these really weird angels called Ophanim. And coming to think about it, it even ends with him having a vision of the new Jerusalem, the heavenly temple, so as to say. So those are kind of connected. Isaac and Jeremiah. Jeremiah is sometimes today called the weeping prophet because he did not want to go. But he says, I'm a youth. How can I do this? I don't know how to speak. And God says he formed him in his womb and he has called him. And so for me, light connection. So I'm not sure. I don't want to be pushing anything, but you can kind of compare that a little bit. I think of Isaac in the Kedah story being kind of like a weeping son being offered up. And then, yeah. Anyways, there are maybe possibly some connections there that I need to more fully form out, but they can be compared to the 3 Genesis patriarchs and the 12 sons of Israel. And now on to what people sometimes call the junk drawer. And this should not be called the junk drawer. Within the writings, there is one subsection called the Megillot, called the Five, and it's based on the idea that these five scrolls and the narratives they tell are read on different feasts for Israel. Song of Songs was connected to the Passover. Esther, I mean, you can probably guess if you know anything about Esther that scroll was connected to the Feast of Purim because it literally talks about it. Lamentations, read on the on the feast day for, I believe, the destruction of the temple. Anyways, and I think Ruth is like the feast of grain. I'm forgetting the name of it, but anyways, these are a subsection within this section of the writings, and the other writings are not contained in a subsection. They're not really connected in the overall structure of the writings. These other writings are not connected to the Megillot in that way. However, they are reflected in upon the Megillot, and the Megillot is reflected in upon itself. Okay, now you're going to have to see this because this is absolutely brilliant and it's going to blow your mind. In Ecclesiastes, it talks about where life is hevel, hevel. It's enigmatic. It's meaningless, as a lot of translations put it. Kind of the vanity of life and how it seems meaningless for those who do what's not right or who waste their time, as well as even it talks about sort of the meaningless feeling for those who do what's right. And then, well, actually the first book is the book of Ruth, and the book of Ruth is about a foreign woman who is brought into the land of Israel, and through a marriage, she is very much made like a new Israel. Like the people at the end say, may your marriage with Boaz, who's a faithful man, be like that of Rachel and Leah. They compare it to Rachel and Leah, who are Israel's wives. So it's like a new Israel. And everything in the book of Ruth is idyllic. It's presented like Eden-like, so as to say. So there is the famine in the beginning of the time, and then after that, Naomi's two sons die. And one of those is Ruth's husband. But from that, Ruth finds a new husband, and she has a new son, and Naomi adopts that son. And so she's given a new son in place of her two sons. And so everybody is a good character in Ruth. There are no bad people. And everybody's loving and caring for this Moabite woman who's not the hottest or most popular in Israel. And even the person in Ruth chapter 4 who decides that they are not going to marry Ruth, this person, they say, okay, and they take off his sandal according to the law. However, if you read that law in Deuteronomy, I think it's chapter 7, if not 7. I'm pretty sure it's chapter 7. If you read that law, they're supposed to take off their sandal, spit in their face, and call them a mean name. And I'm not going to use mean names here. But even he is presented as not that bad. They don't do that much to him. They take his sandal away, and so they're following the law, but it doesn't mention them doing the other disrespectful stuff, and so they even respect that. And so that's the book of Ruth for you. It's this flourishing of new life, and it's even said to take place in the times of the Judges. Now, you may be wondering, why isn't this right after the book of Judges? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, you can see how that would throw off the whole theme, the whole structure of the former prophets, and it would throw off the structure of the Megillot, because this is very much connected to the book of Esther, as we're going to see. But I'm going to get to that in a second. Song of Songs is a song about a woman pursuing a man in love. Song of Songs, that's its original name, not Song of Solomon. It can be, some rabbi said that it is the Holy of Holies in the Jewish TaNaKh. And Song of Songs, if you say something of something, we call Jesus the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That is so as to say that he is the ultimate king, the ultimate Lord. Song of Songs is to say that this is the ultimate song. Okay, so now then there's Ecclesiastes. Now look at this. This is a chiasm. After Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes, then there's Lamentations. So Ecclesiastes is in the center. Song of Songs and Lamentations are connected. What is Lamentations? It is Mother Zion, a woman who represents Zion, who's crying out and who's so distressed. The first of her poems, if I remember correctly, there are 5 poems. And in her 5th poem, her 4 poems are all acrostics, which means each line represents a letter from the alphabet, or the Hebrew alphabet. So one for A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The first letter of the first word for each line, according to that line, is going to start with that. So maybe the first line starts with apples are red, and then the second line is bananas that are blue, and then the third line is choose which one you want for you, and then D, go on. It goes on. And that's why you'll see when you're reading this in your Bible that it has those weird squiggly lines. Those are called Hebrew letters. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin. They're all acrostic until the end, in which Mother Zion just explodes in chaos and in disorder. And she's so grieving the destruction of the temple, and she can't take it anymore, that instead of the letters being orderly, now they're just all out everywhere, and she is just absolutely destroyed. So Song of Songs is the ultimate song of joy, celebrating life, where a woman is looking for love. And some people have said that it represents a kind of the relationship between Israel and God, or God and the church. But you could really think about it as Lady Wisdom pursuing mankind. In the book of Proverbs, Lady Wisdom is calling out for all people to come to her and for them to come and see her. And in the Song of Songs, now this lady is chasing after the man. It's the woman that's doing the chasing. And in Lamentations, we're shown another lady named Mother Zion who's bereaved and who has no sons, and she's rejected and left alone. She feels that there is no point in chasing after anyone. She has been abandoned. She feels abandoned by God. And then you have the book of Esther. Now remember, Ruth is about a foreign woman who goes to the land of Israel. And it's all throughout in the land of Israel. She's married to an Israelite, and through that, her family's established. The book of Esther, on the other hand, is about an Israelite woman in a foreign land in exile. And there's no mention of the land of Israel, whereas Ruth is a foreign woman in the land of Israel the whole time throughout the entirety of the narrative, other than the introduction. And this time, the Israelite woman marries a foreign man, and in the book of Esther, the king is just this absolute doltish pushover. So she marries a foreign person, and she has to bring salvation to all of her people through that. So you can see the connections there, and they're all mirrored off of Ecclesiastes. Notice that. And Ecclesiastes is about vanity of vanities. Everything seems pointless. And then Lamentations, and you hear like this crying out, this mourning and this grieving over the temple is gone, and it feels that God has abandoned us. And then in Esther, there's not even a view of the land of Israel anymore. Now that the temple has been destroyed and they're in exile, they're deep in exile, they're already in the Persian period. They're not like, this is after Babylon, it feels pointless. It feels hopeless. And even in the book of Esther, God is never mentioned. It never uses the word God in all of the book of Esther, the canonical Hebrew Esther. However, the book of Esther, what it's doing, the book of Esther itself is a chiasm. If I remember correctly, Ruth is a chiasm itself as well. And it's all built off of the fact that if you're looking at it, things are so weird and so strange that they have to be supernatural. You're supposed to look for how God is working behind the scenes in the background. Interesting thing about the book of Ruth as well is that God is only mentioned by name by the people, by the workers of Boaz, and Boaz himself, who says that may God bless you. But he's never mentioned in the narrative as doing anything himself. You're supposed to see that for yourself as well. And so Ruth and Song of Songs present the idyllic, Edenic, pre-exile existence where God is making everything flourish and chasing after his people. And then Ecclesiastes is a reflection on the meaningless of life. And then from Ecclesiastes on, you can see how everything does seem meaningless. Mother Zion feels abandoned. Esther herself thinks that she is going to be destroyed along with all of her people. But it shows that God is still there nonetheless. Now, I will say there are variances in manuscripts. You can find just about any ordering of these books. I think there's like 4 or 5 major orderings within even ancient manuscripts, and this is not the only one. But this is the one that I think gives the most meaning to it. And I've seen a lot of scholars, really solid scholars, that are sticking with this structure of the Megillot. These 5 are together. This is the Megillot, and these are always together. That is not a difference among ancient manuscripts. Okay, now I want to move on to the other books within the Ketuvim. So the Ketuvim begins with the Psalms. And Psalm 1, what is Psalm 1 about? It's about the blessed one who is like a tree, who bears fruit in the season by meditating on the Torah, and how the wicked are like chaff that are going to be blown away. Notice that it's almost talking about a person that is in Eden. They're like a tree. That Edenic imagery. And it goes throughout, and throughout it, there's all there's stuff that happens in David's life and in the life of the authors of the Psalms where they feel that God has abandoned them. But towards the end, there's more hope than ever in God coming back. There's even the songs of ascent, of going up to the temple. The temple is a major theme in the book of the Psalms. And what better than to find out that on the opposite end of the writings, it begins with the first word being Adam, who's in the Garden of Eden. Think of Psalm 1, Edenic imagery, a man who's planted by streams of water, who's like a tree. And then Chronicles is very much focused on the temple, just like Psalms. It talks about the priesthood, and again, Chronicles is retelling the whole story up until then. And then it even ends talking with Cyrus's decree for the people of Israel to go up, out, and then it just ends. That's, in Hebrew, it's not finishing a sentence. It's an unfinished sentence. And actually, I believe it was a Bible Project content, whether a video or an article that I read, that said that at least one of the genealogies, and they go back and forth in circles, and then all of that, one of the genealogies records all the way up to 6 generations after the exile. That's some time after the exile. And I don't think that's the reason why it's put after Ezra Nehemiah. I'll get into that in a second. So it's going way up after exile. However, when it actually ends the story at the end of 2 Chronicles is with Cyrus calling people to go up out of exile to build the temple. Well, he doesn't finish that, but you'll see in Ezra Nehemiah that is exactly what you see. You see the king of Cyrus sending Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah in their 3 waves to go up to build the temple. And so you may wonder, why does Ezra Nehemiah not go after Chronicles if that's how Ezra Nehemiah begins? Well, it's because Ezra Nehemiah is a failure. They do build the temple, but if you actually read the story, there are people that are cheering and they're clapping, but it tells that you can't even tell the difference between who's cheering and clapping and who's crying and weeping, because the people who had seen the first temple and they're seeing the second temple, they know that's nothing like the first temple. And it doesn't even talk about God's glory and presence coming to fill it again like the first time. They tried to renew Israel through a Torah reading program, through Passover, through making them leave their foreign wives, which is interesting because in the book of Ruth, Ruth is a foreign woman, and she's shown as a good person who's being faithful. And Boaz is a faithful Torah-abiding Israelite who marries Ruth, and through that is brought David, King David, the great King David. But anyways, they tell them that they have to divorce their wives. The end of it just ends in disaster. Ezra and Nehemiah, Ezra's pulling out his own hair, he's pulling out other people's hair. And he sees people working on the Sabbath, priests that can't do their jobs right. I think we all know how frustrating that is when people can't do their jobs. And so it's a failed mission. And the book of Chronicles, what it's doing is it's retelling from the Torah to the end of the writings, the whole story of Israel. And it's expecting somebody who will lead the people up and do it right. Because Ezra and Nehemiah, one of the major things that it's about is that even though the people of Israel are now in the land of Israel, they're still in exile. Because their hearts have not been transformed, like in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah. It says that their hearts will be transformed and God will write their law in their hearts and they will love him and desire him and be with him. They need a Messiah who will lead them into the land, who will give them renewed hearts to love God with what they have and not be failed priests, people who disobey his commands. This is a failed... you hear this in all types of sermon series about how you need to be like Ezra and Nehemiah, these people who know how to do leadership and such. I don't know many leaders who go around bonking people on the head, making them sign contracts about how they're doing crap at work, even though I understand, you can understand that. But this is a failure. It's a story, it's a true story, so it's telling it. But that's why Chronicles goes after Ezra and Nehemiah. In fact, Chronicles is filled with a bunch of people who fail and screw up. If you don't believe that, go ahead and read the book of Kings. However, Chronicles has the material that Chronicles is incorporating is showing key figures as types that we are supposed to look forward to. Like David, it doesn't mention stories of his weakness where he's hiding from Saul, and it doesn't mention his big screw up with Bathsheba or him asking his son Solomon to go off and murder all these people whenever he becomes king. It actually mentions the fact that God did choose Solomon in Kings or in Samuel. That's actually like questionable. It seems that Bathsheba and the prophet Nathan are actually just in it to get Solomon to become king. But Chronicles presents them as archetypal ideal leaders, and David especially, who's putting in the time and the money. David practically builds the temple himself in Chronicles, gathering all the resources, preparing it for his son Solomon. And so it presents the archetypal best side of these characters that we are supposed to look forward to in the characters to come. So that's the book of Chronicles. And so of course it's not going to have Ezra and Nehemiah, even though it goes well beyond that in its genealogies, 6 to 7 genealogies afterwards. Because the response to and let him go up is not supposed to be a screw up and a failure like Ezra and Nehemiah. And remember, this is the Bible that Jesus is reading. And actually, I think one of the good things about our order of the Bible, and I don't really care for our order of the New Testament either, but that's for a different time, is that the first book in the New Testament writings, the apostolic writings in our Bibles, is the book of Matthew. And what does the book of Matthew open with? a genealogy, the same way that Chronicles opens with a genealogy. And so it has three sets of 14, the 14 from Abraham to David, and then from David to the exile, and then from the exile to Jesus. And Jesus is the one that responds to the decree of Cyrus to go into the land. He brings a new type of conquest, so as to say. And this time, instead of fighting against the Canaanites and the giants that took the land, this time Jesus is going at the powers that are holding Israelites down, the dark powers, the demons who are seen as sort of spiritual descendants of these giants. He's casting demons out and telling them they have no authority. He's cleansing people and making them, he's freeing them from their sins, forgiving them from their sins, and making them healed. Which, if you were like crippled or such, you couldn't enter into the temple. You were unclean in a sense. Think of the book of Chronicles and the importance of the temple. Matthew is a great way to is a great text to read right after consuming the TaNaKh. Okay, so Chronicles and Psalms are connected. Proverbs and Ezra Nehemiah, I honestly have some more thinking to do about the connections between those two. Nonetheless, you also have Job and you have Daniel. I should have read before this as doing my homework, but I forgot to. But I'm pretty sure the book of Daniel calls Daniel righteous. There are very few people called righteous. Noah's one of them. Job is righteous. He's the archetypal righteous person who suffers. And in the end, and he's wondering, why am I suffering? Why am I suffering? Eliphaz says it might have been because you sinned. The rest of his friends are just absolute jerks who you should never have friends like them, who just all blame it on him and say he must have done something that he didn't know. And at the end of Job, God shows up in a thunderstorm with lightning and shows him the cosmos and says that I am God. I have created everything, and you are in no place to call me out and to say that I'm not judging justly. And you could not do any better you cannot do it like this. You were not here since the beginning. And Job recognizes his place. He says, here I am in dust and ashes, and I repent. But God says that Job's friends are not right in how they talked about him, like Job. And so Job is to offer up a sacrifice on their behalf, and only then will God forgive them. And Job also looks for somebody who can speak to God for me, who's going to be like on my behalf, who can speak to humanity for God, because we're all sinned and screwed up. And so he looks for that righteous intercessor. And for the moment, Job is going to have to be that righteous intercessor for his friends, and he does offer up a sacrifice for his friends. And Daniel is full of all of his own things, but Daniel ends with Daniel reading from the book of Jeremiah and seeing that they're supposed to go up after 70 years and praying and asking God that they do that, and confessing for the sins of Israel, for his own fathers, and for sins of other people that he didn't even do on other people's account, being a righteous intercessor. And then the angel is actually showing him how that's all going to play out in the future. So you can see the connections between those. And again, I have to find out between Proverbs and Ezra Nehemiah. So these aren't really like connecting with the Megillot in the same way, but they're reflecting in upon it in the same way that the Megillot is reflecting upon Ecclesiastes. The former prophets are reflecting upon themselves. The latter prophets are representative of the the patriarchs in Genesis, and the Torah is reflecting in upon Leviticus, with the Day of Atonement being the hinge from which it all reflects. This is insane. It's beautiful. There's intentionality in this design. There's not intentionality in the design and in the structure of the Old Testament. The Old Testament is not bad. However, it's not the best. It's not the Hebrew scriptures in the order that Jesus read them. and it does not bring out meaning and significance. At the end of this, you are not looking forward to an Ezra, Nehemiah. You're looking to something so much greater, who's going to respond to that decree of Cyrus that the people go up out to the land of Israel, and that is restored, and that Israel's glory is restored. You're looking forward to that Messiah. And so now you understand why the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders of Jesus' day are looking forward to something different. Now, there's also religious, political context, like the Maccabees, that happens outside of this testament. That's something totally different. But that is so important. It's because while they didn't read the TaNaKh totally right, because they were looking for eternal life and not for Jesus, as Jesus himself says in the book of John, they had the right order. And a lot of them are reading it really well. These Second Temple Jews, as you see in Pseudepigrapha, Apocrypha, and other texts as such, they're getting these readings because of the intentionally designed TaNaKh that you could get if you read it in this order. And so memorize this order. I have this order memorized. Learn this order. Learn the significance and the meaning of it. And it's not that hard to learn once you learn why books are in the places that they're in. And you have to learn a little bit about those books by reading them, which I would suggest that you do for the rest of your life, as I'm doing, and join in with me on that. But this has an intentional order. In fact, let me show you this, because if this other stuff didn't blow your mind, here's this. Genesis begins with Adam in Eden. Psalms, the first book of the writings, begins by talking about somebody who, if he's faithful and meditates on the instruction of Yahweh, he will be like a tree by waters. That connection, this has to, because of Chronicles and its connection there within the Ketuvim, and because of Genesis, Psalms must be talking about somebody in Eden, a faithful new Adam who will meditate on the law. And that's also, it also has to be that because it's actually connected to the book of Joshua that begins the writings, where God commands him to meditate on his law day and night and not let it depart from his mouth. These two are connected. Oh, and also, so that's connected right there, Psalm 1 and Joshua 1, but also the end of Malachi, the end of the 12, as well as Deuteronomy are connected, because Deuteronomy is looking forward to a prophet like Moses. It says that there had not arisen since that day a prophet like Moses, and that's one way that you know that there has to at least have been redactors. To what extent, we don't know, but there have to have been redactors to Deuteronomy, because obviously Moses didn't read that. These are human written texts inspired by God, not just God taking over these people and making them write a bunch of senseless nonsense. As we see, this is intelligently designed. And then Malachi is looking for the prophet Elijah, who will be sent ahead to lead the people up out of exile. So boom, boom, connection at the end of the instruction in the prophets, and connection at the beginning of the prophets and the beginning of the writings. That I actually learned from the Bible Project Introduction to the Hebrew Bible class. But what I'm about to show you, so what I'm about to show you is my own thoughts. Genesis and Psalm 1. Genesis 1, Psalm 1. Adam in Genesis fails. The person in Psalm 1 that it's looking forward to is somebody who will not fail, who will not be like that Adam. Also, Deuteronomy. Remember, it ends with the people just outside of the land, waiting to enter into the land. And what does Chronicles end with? Cyrus's decree for the people to go up out of the land. So not only are all of these chiastic in themselves, but the whole TaNaKh in and of itself is a chiasm, is one giant, beautiful, intentionally designed chiasm. And so as I'm filming this here in 2024, I'm going through the Bible as I have been doing the past 3 years, 2 times, and I'm going through it for my 9th and 10th time. And the 4 times in the past 2 years that I've done it before this, I've been reading in the TaNaKh structure. And all types of things have been sticking out to me that absolutely would not, maybe not absolutely, but were not and would not be sticking out to me if I was reading it in the Old Testament order. And so the reason I'm releasing it at this time when I am in 2024 is so that if you're reading the Bible this year, or heck, if you're reading the Bible at all, I want to encourage you to, whenever you get to Judges, don't let judge Ruth. Don't let Joshua judge Ruth. Let him judge Samuel. Take a turn and read the TaNaKh. The TaNaKh is great. It has its own internal structure, and you absolutely have to read it in this order. And so that's what I mean when I say consumption. This the order of the TaNaKh means that we should consume it as something that is internally designed beautifully. All the books have their own beautiful internal designs. I mean, you have to just guess that based on this fact. And obviously, I could show you that. Bible Project videos are awesome. They show you that, and I would always recommend listening and watching those beforehand. But also, other scholars have their own structures that are sometimes different or the same, and they can bring out other things that show that, and that's awesome. And maybe I'll do some of those later. Also, it has implications for the canon. Now, we already know that some Roman Catholics and others will argue that there was an Alexandrian canon. Like there were Jews living in Alexandria, Egypt, which was the hub and center of Hellenistic, which just means Greek Jewish life. And they assumed that because these Jews were more Greek, that they had a different type of canon. That is outdated scholarship, one. Two, we have extensive writings from an author over there. His name is Philo of Alexandria, and he never once alludes to the Apocrypha or the texts that are not found in the TaNaKh. In fact, if I remember correctly, he even refers to the TaNaKh itself. Three, we have this. Jesus refers to the TaNaKh, and right here we see that the TaNaKh's own structure does not allow for you to add in other texts. Where are you going to add in Wisdom of Solomon? Where are you going to add in 1 or 2 Maccabees? You can't add it in. If you add 1 or 2 Maccabees after Chronicles, what you're doing is you're showing a different Messiah other than Jesus. Now, I think these texts are great, and you should read them, and I'm a fanboy over them, and I talk about them all the time. But they have no place within the rigid design of the TaNaKh. This does not allow for anything else to be added in. The canon, the Protestant canon, is based on this very fact that God had set the canon, and that it cannot and was not decided by the church, even though there were early church councils, be they not ecumenical or whatever they were, that decided on the Apocrypha being added in. Those were Greek-speaking church fathers that had read the Septuagint, the Greek scriptures, as well as other Greek texts that were translated at the same time, that did not understand the Jewish Hebrew TaNaKh that Jesus himself was reading and refers to in Luke 24:44 and in other places in the Gospels. That is the text that Jesus and every Jew before him read, even down to Ben Sira. In the Apocrypha, there are references to the canon. But anyways, I could go on about that. There are many arguments to be made, a lot of which are not being made by Protestants. Instead, they're making anti-intellectual claims, like that Judith is not historical, when Judith is an allegory anyways. They're making ridiculous arguments against the Apocrypha. That should not be acceptable, and that make me want to become orthodox just to argue against them. But one of the arguments should be that the TaNaKh has its own rigid internal design, and we need to start paying attention to it like Jesus paid attention to it. And then there is also composition. There are scholars, critical scholars, source scholars, who are looking for what were the sources behind the TaNaKh. They said that they've come up with a documentary hypothesis that says that there was J, E, D, and P, the Yahwist, the Elohist, the priestly source, and the Deuteronomist source. It says there were 5 writers or schools of writing that had their own traditions that they wrote at different times, and one redactor who had to be the most idiotic redactor to put supposed contradictions that they themselves see as contradictions, and the reason for them putting this together. Apparently these contradictions mean that it had to be 5 different traditions that were all sewn together by some finishing redactor. But apparently those problems were not really solved because those problems continued on in our text, and those problems are seen as the reason why there had to be a redactor. But also, if you look at a poem, for example, again, we're going back to structure, and it's A, B, C, B, A, you cannot take out B, C, and you cannot take out line B, A. That jacks up and screws the whole internal structure. And every single story, as we see within these books in and of themselves had this intelligent structure, but this as a whole has its own internal structure. And you can't piecemeal, you can't take it apart, you can't dissect it and put this into 5 different traditions. That is a ridiculous claim. It's absolutely anti-intellectual. And even people who are coming on with these new theories like supplementary hypothesis that adds it an R, some of them combining JE, it doesn't matter how you cut it, how you cut the cake, or however you try to cut it to prove that it was originally multiple mini cakes, the whole thing comes together and it has one art. And what you're doing is you're screwing over that art that these scholars are claiming. They look at this and they say that it's beautiful literature, and that's why they study it in the first place, because they have no religious devotion to it. But then they can't even pay attention to the actual structure of it. It's ridiculous, it's hilarious, and you wonder why they're even scholars. But anyways, those are at least 3 implications that this structure has. And I hope that this is a structure that you will continue to enjoy and meditate on and think about and consider, and that you will find even more connections than I have shown you here in the text today. Thank you for watching. Feel free to watch my other videos, listen to my podcast, The Babylonian, found in the link on my channel. Also in the description to this video. It's on this YouTube channel if you listen on YouTube. You can go to my website. I have all types of notes on primary sources, especially from the Second Temple period, and you need to check those out. But until then, thank you for watching. Like the video, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, and really appreciate that. I hope that this will inspire a lifelong meditation on the same texts that Jesus himself was meditating on.